Okay, hello everyone. I think we'll go ahead and start. So welcome everybody to this panel on integrated energy planning. I think it's good morning, good evening and good day. So it's great to have you all here. I think some of you have been at the forum annual meeting during your day, so it might be a long evening. But we will have 1 hour with some very exciting speakers, and I look forward to this session. So we will look at the role of CSOs in integrated energy planning, and we will hear reflections from Africa, Latin America, and Asia in relation to integrated energy planning, and we will also situate that work in the context of COVID-19 and what the implications of that might be. So thank you very much to the NGO Forum for organizing this panel, and it's a pleasure for me to be part of this. My name is Jessica Rosine. Some of you know me. It's great to see your list of names and also lots of new names. I have a background in monitoring international financial institutions and now work part-time as a freelance CSO consultant in international advocacy, and as part of that work, supporting some facilitation on the integrated energy planning coordination. I'm based in Melbourne, and I'd like to acknowledge that I live and work on the land of the Wurundjeri, indigenous Wurundjeri of the Kulin Nation, and I recognize that sovereignty has never been ceded. I'll give us a brief overview of the agenda. So Ryan Hassan will provide us some context for this work in integrated energy planning. And then we will hear the different reflections from the different regions, starting with Kenya. That'll be about 10 minutes, followed by Q&A. Then 10 minutes Q&A, then we have reflections, two presentations, one from Peru and one from the Philippines, followed again by Q&A, and then we have 10 minutes, and then we'll bring it to the end. And just a heads up that this is being live streamed, and in relation to questions, could you please put them in the chat, and then Jen at the NGO Forum will collate them, and I will try and pick up as many as possible to direct to the speakers. And if you could indicate if you have a question to a specific speaker, who that is. I will then hand over to Ryan to give us the context. I don't think Ryan needs introducing, but I briefly will. So Ryan is the director of the NGO Forum on the ADB. He is a Bangladeshi national and has a background in environmental and social studies, and is pursuing a doctorate in political science at the University of the Philippines. And he has led the NGO Forum network for several years and advocates on the ADB and Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. So over to you, Ryan, to set us up. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Jessica. I'll probably keep my input very, very short and very, very simple. And can everybody hear me? I sound all right? Okay, great. So I'll just start off with the notion of integrated energy planning. And there is no fixed formal definition, but I think one of the loose understandings of the concept is looking at best practice planning tools in the realm of power sector of developing countries and making sure that you can meet people's needs. So the issues that fall within the ambit of integrated energy planning are least cost supply, demand considerations, the issue of access, affordability of power, energy, and electricity, safety, environmental and social protection, how do you integrate renewable energy, all within the national context. So this is not a new concept. We have all heard that civil society has been trying to influence national government, but there has been specific use of integrated energy planning by civil society in Asia, which has led to very interesting results. And IEP, that's the short form for it, has also been used in Latin America and Africa as well. Later on in the session today, we will hear live experiences. So one example is Green ID Vietnam used integrated energy planning to derail coal finance. And the interesting thing is they learned the strategy from civil society in Thailand. In Peru, Dar, who's a speaker here, Cesar Gamboa, they have influenced national energy planning in Peru. Kenya and broader African groups have used integrated energy planning in the context of achieving Sustainable Development Goal 7, which is sustainable energy for all. All these are not perfect scenarios. There are challenges within each of those struggles, which where there's a lot of learning and there's a lot of shared experiences. So what is the playing field for integrated energy planning? The playing field primarily is in the realm of the state, which is the government. That is where the target is, where you want to get upstream in government planning in terms of what projects will manifest. One of the second target institutions may possibly be the United Nations Sustainable Energy for All, the UNSC for All itself, which is tracking developing countries meeting their SDG 7s. And then, of course, where I guess we as NGO Forum on ADB are very keen, the role of multilateral development banks and development financial institutions who are investing in the energy space. Just a note on that, the scale of energy investment in decentralized access for poor and vulnerable groups to get electricity has not been the priority of MDBs. If you look at the entire energy lending portfolio of MDBs, be it the World Bank, the ADBs, it doesn't even come to 2% of their total lending. So there is a $59 billion demand there in decentralized energy access, and that is a space where civil society has to speak up. Um, so where is the energy conversation now? It's definitely not with the people. We find the government, and there's a government-private capital nexus on energy conversation. So energy is deemed as energy security. Energy is also deemed as a very private-led, fossil fuel subsidized corporate enterprise. And in each of these decisions on what project manifests, the role of the people and the role of the civil society is very, very limited. So where do we want to bring the energy conversation? We want to bring it out into the public space. That's where we need to correlate the core importance of energy in areas which matter to us, like energy in agriculture, energy in healthcare, energy in inclusivity for indigenous peoples in far remote places who don't have lights, and how does that relate to their education? So I think it's a very interesting space which brings in a lot of inclusivity of voices into the conversation on energy, which is not only, of course, the climate crisis is important and the emissions are important, the climate movement is important, but people's lives are related to energy. Maybe later on, when we will hear the Philippines, they'll talk about the price of electricity to be probably pivotal to the conversation around integrated energy planning. Just a few more thoughts. There are formal channels to influence government, and that can be like the national energy planning processes. But say I'm from Bangladesh, we have a power sector master plan, which is up for review in November. But I don't think civil society has access to that review process. So the social movements and the civil society in the country have developed an alternative energy plan where they're talking about a different form of an energy mix, which is challenging the government's fossil fuel plan till 2040. So what are we really discussing here? We're talking about the national energy mix. We're talking about grid solutions. We're talking about off-grid solutions. And we're also talking about mini-grid solutions as well. But all that meets the needs of the people. So the broader question of development, of bringing CSOs closer to an upstream advocacy on energy investments, that is what is our goal, and learning from each other. So in that spirit, South-South cooperation is absolutely vital. We need to hear from each other, from Asia, Latin America, Africa. Even I'm sure there are interesting notions in the Balkan states in Central Asia. So our intention is to learn from each other and then embody those practices, what we have learned, down to our national engagement. So I'll just stop there. I hope I could keep it in time.
That was really fantastic, Ryan. A very concise summary and placing us where we are having the discussions. And I think the main point is that it's a uniting tool, right? So it crosses across so many areas and also across so many financiers. So we're looking at the national level, and we don't have to focus on individual banks, but we can find a way of targeting governments through those issues that meet the people's needs. And that's exactly what we're going to hear from now from the different regions. So I will ask our next speaker to share her reflections from Kenya. We have Ikal Angele. Ikal is an environmental activist. Ikal, could I ask you to share your video, if that's possible with your bandwidth? If not, then sorry. Or maybe I'm not seeing it.
I have shared the video.
Okay, great, thank you. Ikal is the co-founder and director of the Friends of Lake Turkana in Kenya, a grassroots organization that seeks to foster social and economic and environmental justice. Ikal has a master's in public policy and political science, and in 2012 was awarded the Goldman Environmental Prize for her work on the impacts of the Gilbel-Gibe 3 Dam on the indigenous communities in northern Kenya. Ikal, if you could give us some overview of your work in integrated energy planning, that would be fantastic. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jessica. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all. I'll pick up from what Ryan has said, and he really did give a good setting to the whole conversation around IEP. And I'm going to look at it from three perspectives. Looking at generation, distribution, access, and cost is a very critical part to it. And then, of course, one thing that we've started to look at around the political economy of sustainable energy for all, which is looking at governance, ownership, and control, who's doing this, and the aspects of low carbon development. But of course, what we've noticed is the advocacy around sustainable energy for all has always treated energy in isolation of the wider social, economic, political context within which they are located, with the consideration given to questions around power, the aspects of governance, and inequality in the production of pre-existing geography of energy marginality. In the recent past, you've seen everybody talking about universal delivery, the increase in the number of call for proposals around low-cost energy. And if you look at it, it's looking at the cost of the energy and how this energy can reach perhaps hard to reach areas, with the thinking that technology is the silver bullet. So you can see an increase in research, an increase in funding for research around technology, with technology around energy, but there's little work around the generation. As Ryan has just spoken around the aspect of generation, what energy is being generated from where, who's being impacted during this generation, who's informing the generation of energy. You're seeing it, a lot of it is a discussion between financiers, if it's the IFIs, it's government, and it's private sector. So the actual work that we've been looking at in Kenya, and we have colleagues who are looking at the cartels around the energy production within the country. So there's a whole who controls what energy is being produced, where it's being produced. We have a lot of wind power. We have, whether it's geothermal, whether it is push for the Lamu coal plant, all this generation, who's deciding what mix is being put together to generate this energy. As you've mentioned, the work that we've been doing in questioning the hydroelectric power generation and this question of Africa's DAC. And so you see huge, the focus on large energy projects to then eventually go to the main grid and come back to the communities. Most of the communities where this energy is generated, if you look at the Grand Dinga Dam, if you look at the Omo, the Gibe Dam, all this energy, if you look even the closest, the Takwel Dam in Kenya, the energy that is produced in those areas does not serve the people. So the people are not part of the discussion around the generation. So they lose out in terms of their land, they lose out in terms of their livelihoods, but then they do not make, they're not part of the decision-making around if they get the energy. And so the idea that sustainable energy for all works, we have to really ask ourselves, is it a reality or is it a pipe dream? If the current system under which all this is happening is not questioned. the distribution of it, the cost around distribution, the focus on a centralized system of energy is quite questionable, because then it has to go to the main grid, and then the main grid then decides what is the cost of bringing it back to mostly rural populations, marginalized populations. Is something we then have to, we've been looking at and really asking, why didn't we talk about mini grids, as Ryan has mentioned? Why don't we talk about decentralized, the democratization of energy? And if we cannot start to really see democratization of energy as a form to inform how we attain sustainable energy for all, it then continues to be a pipe dream, because eventually it's the powers that be, and that's why we sort of were saying the political context under which energy is generated and distributed determines who gets energy, when they get energy, and at what cost. So then you look at access. It is when the state decides that you get access to, and you see all this, whether it's last mile discussions being pushed, where it's the last mile, who then gets the energy, the electricity is being pushed as an agenda, but then they don't have a discussion around why do they need this. And if you look at it, a lot of focus has been in some, Ryan has mentioned around health and water, agriculture. Right now you can see, and I mentioned COVID in this particular case, you see through this current pandemic that a lot of the public infrastructure, the public hospitals, public water systems do not have an energy system that enables them to pump out the water, to access medical services during this time. So again, the distribution, where it's distributed, who accesses it is quite key in the work that we are doing around integrated energy planning. Of course, the cost is something else. We've seen areas where energy is taken, and because the communities were not party of it, citizens were not party to the discussions around the entire energy planning, and they do not know the cost. And at first it's set up, and after a while they cannot afford whether am I going to pay for food or am I going to pay for energy, because the cost is it's already very high for them. So you see a situation where people have electricity for a month or two, and then after that they cannot afford to pay for it. And they ask, well, we thought it was free, because the people who set it up did not tell us that there was a cost implication and we would need to pay this much money for it. So those are key things around it. Of course, now the second part I'm going to talk about is the governance, ownership and control. Who owns this? Who controls the waste generated, the waste distributed? Really key critical aspects, because then you look at financialization of the energy sector. Because then the private sector, when you talk about PPPs, the private sector is the one that determines who gets and when they get it. When you talk about low carbon development, everyone is pushing for green energy. But then again, the same questions of governance, control, and ownership have to be looked at. But finally, we have to look at the gender inequality and the structural, the systemic, structural inequalities that exacerbate gender inequalities around the energy sector. To pick up on issues around, during the COVID times, the advocacy, we are not shifting there's no advocacy shift from energy planning, because we realize that it's very critical, and it is part of everything that we do, political, social, environmental. And it is very relevant now, because we are seeing a reduction in interest around energy issues, and everyone's focusing on the health aspect. So it becomes more critical right now to look at energy planning within all the different sectors, whether it's healthcare, agriculture, water, but again, also around the gender inequalities and how we address them. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Ikal. And you've already addressed the questions on the COVID context, but also I think what was really striking was your comments on the political aspects of energy and who controls who gets what. And that is something that we will sort of see through all of the presentations, and is really key to answering when we look at access as well. Maybe I can ask you, do you see, there was one thing I didn't quite catch. You said there's a reduction in interest in this energy work in the context of COVID?
Yes, because everybody's looking at the COVID situation as a health issue. So no one's looking at it as a social, economic issue, as an access issue. So you see, if you look at every interest of funding, interest of most partners, governments looking at, the aspects of. Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. So you'd see that as a threat, maybe, but possibly also an opportunity or a need to take people there?
Yeah, I think it is an opportunity for us to see the integrated aspects of it. You know,
Yeah.
that COVID did not, it may not have been the driver, but then it has shown, it has highlighted the intersectionality of all these different issues, especially on the rural poor, on women.
Okay, thanks very much. So we now actually already have time for questions and responses. So if people have questions, could we ask you to put them in the chat, please? And then I'll try and pick them up and direct them to Ikal or Ryan. Or yeah, you can also use the Q&A box. So I'm not yet seeing any questions. I wonder whether I'm not looking in the right place. No, I don't think so. Well, maybe we'll continue the presentations, and then people might have more time to think about questions. So if I could ask, we'll go to our next speaker, Cesar Gamboa. Cesar is the Executive Director of Derecho Ambiente y Recursos Naturales from Peru. And Cesar is a lawyer and has a Doctor of Law and Political Science, and is also a researcher and professor at Pontificia Catholic University. And his organization, Derecho Ambiente y Recursos Naturales, works on environmental issues and promotes sustainable actions in the Amazon rainforest. Over to you, Cesar. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Jessica. Can you hear me very well? Can you hear me?
Yes, it's good. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. It's a pleasure and honor to be here to share with the panelists and the members of this session the experience of Peru. I prepared a presentation, so I want to share with you the presentation very quickly. I agree with Ikal and Ryan said. I think that the civil society have included and have to learn about the energy planning process, because at this level of policies, the governments, among other stakeholders, make decisions that affect our life, our future. No? I think in the case of Peru, it's a good experience of that, and we are living the last 2 decades bad and good experience. I would like to share that and how we learn about that. Yeah. So let me start talking about the Camisea gas project. Yeah. It's one of the largest energy projects in Peru, and it was central to the growing economy in our Peruvian economy in the last 2 decades. Yeah. So a little history: during the 80s and 90s, Shell and Mobil found natural gas in the Amazon rainforest on the Peruvian side. No? But in 1999, the Peruvian government broke negotiations with these 2 companies because they disagree about the royalties percentage, how they split the revenues, and how to handle the environmental social impacts. So these companies lost $400 million that they invest in the exploration phase in a few months. No? So in 2000, when the Fujimori government finished, the Peru signed a new contract with a new consortium to grant the Camisea field for extraction, transportation, and national distribution. No? The total production of Camisea field is 8 trillion cubic feet of natural gas, but also this field has liquid natural gas too. No? And IDB support this project, trying to improve the environmental social safeguard of this project. No? So in 2004, the project started its operation. Civil society focusing firmly on environmental social impacts, because this gas block took place in the Amazon rainforest, no? Which overlap with natural protected areas, indigenous lands, and also indigenous people who were isolated or not contacted. No? You can see in the pictures. Everybody was happy because it was, I don't know, it wasn't a good project because it's going to change our economy for the next decades. But nobody saw what was happening behind the scene, no? The exportation business. So in fact, in 2004, Peru signed a new contract with Repsol to export natural gas. So our projected national demand for the next 20 years, from 2004 to 2024, would only need half of the total reserve of Camisea field, no? So 4 trillion cubic feet of the natural gas. So the idea that this exportation project was good because we are going to get more revenues if we sell the gas, if we sell the gas to the foreign markets, yeah. And International Finance Corporation, IDB, financed this second project too. But how was this possible? No? How can the government decide to export gas when the Camisea project already started its operation? So in this graphic, you can see the Peruvian government projected electricity demand for the next 20 years, from 2004 until 2024. And this information justifies, this official report justifies the exportation of Camisea gas as a good investment. No? Peru has 8 trillion cubic feet of natural gas from the Camisea field. And according to this report, Peru just needs the half of this reserve, no, for the next 20 years to satisfy the electricity demand. No? So that's why the Peruvian government decided to sell the other 50% to Repsol to obtain quick revenues. No? And this report were made in 2004, and with the Energy Authority continued using this report until December 2006. But what was the surprise? The surprise was that in January 2007, so a few months ago, the Ministry of Energy and Mines came up with a new electricity demand projection. No? So Peru should have used or should need 6 trillion of natural gas for the next 18 years if we want to continue growing according to our projection. No? So now Peru needed 75% of Camisea natural gas reserves, but Peru signed this export contract with Repsol in 2004, so we couldn't use the other 50% of the Camisea field. No? So it was necessary to continue exploring more areas to the Amazon rainforest to find natural gas. No? So it was a terrible mistake because Peru couldn't plan how much energy we need as a society considering our economic growth. So it's pretty clear that the business as usual model and private interests try to get more economic benefits to sell or export the whole gas. And Peru was not prepared to take advantage of this project and its revenue. No? We can say now that the lack of prioritization of national demand, the lack of massification of gas infrastructure for local consumers, the National Energy Plan produced a long-term energy insecurity for the Peruvian society. No? And what was the impact of that? So Peru should expand oil and gas exploration operations in the Amazon rainforest. You can see in 5 years, from 2004 to 2009, 35 million hectares of the Amazon rainforest has blocks, oil and gas blocks, overlapping with indigenous land and protected areas, among other fragile ecosystems. So Peruvian civil society hasn't focused on corruption issues and how the Peruvian government made this business thing. And we have to learn. No? We should learn about. We have a broad perspective to monitor the entire energy business in Peru, and also we have to learn and propose energy governance model too. No, I mean the lack of energy planning show us as a civil society that it's too risky to continue promoting energy investment in the Peruvian Amazon without an energy planning process. No, so. We learned that because years later, Peru and Brazil signed an agreement to build dams on the Peruvian side in the Amazon rainforest that will affect 1.5 million hectares of the Amazon rainforest, overlapping with indigenous communities, producing resemblance, and overlapping with natural protected areas, affecting many fragile ecosystems. Also, we know now that there was some bribes and corruption issues because the Brazilian construction companies, they're gonna build these dams in the Peruvian side. And according to this international agreement, Peru should define the percentage of how much electricity Peru will use in the next 30 years. And Brazil surplus, so the surplus, Peru has to sell to Brazil. No? So Peruvian civil society made a huge campaign raising the environmental social impacts of these dams. But we include in our narrative, in our speech, in this campaign, that is an economic impact, because it's not a good business for us because we don't have an energy planning process or energy planning tool to know how much electricity we're going to use, what we're going to use in the next 30 years. You know? So we stop these risky projects cooperating with indigenous organizations, academia, and so on. So what are the lessons here, at least for Peru in the last 20 years? No? I think that every negotiation of natural resources or energy planning process should include some principles. So we are not thinking it's only on business issue. No, we need to include the equity, the access of electricity for the poor people. We need to prioritize national demand. We think we need to include the environmental social risk, or not just also thinking about the business issue. No, how we are going to win. No? The other conclusion is that energy government is not just planning process. We should include also other indicators like participation, transparency, and accountability. No? Also, if we want to improve the energy planning process, if we want to have a robust energy planning process, we need to cross with another tools like FPRI, land use planning, strategic environmental assessment to try to influence, and that civil society can have the capacity to influence in the energy planning process. So thank you so much. I'll stop here.
Thanks very much, Cesar. That was a really concise overview again, and I think it also showed the reasons why integrated energy planning is so important, or if it is not done, or if it is done badly, if projections are done badly, what the result can be. So Cesar, I might ask you as well to reflect on whether anything has changed for you and your organization in the context of COVID. Are you seeing different trends in Peru as a result of that in relation to energy and energy advocacy? And is IEP still as relevant, or have there been new opportunities or threats? If you could offer any thoughts on that, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, very briefly, I think I would like to raise one issue about the context. No, so regarding the implication of the COVID crisis in our economy, and thinking in a sustainable perspective, I think at least in Latin America region, we are living on a running and a race to the bottom. No, so it means that Latin America countries are diluting, are raising the environmental social safeguard to facilitate investment, especially in the oil and gas mining sector. So they are changing the legal framework, adapting to this new normality, this new reality of the COVID crisis. And they include, for example, online citizen participation mechanisms or free flowing informed consultation in an online mechanism. So they don't recognize that the many of local communities doesn't have the tools, or they don't have internet to connect to participate in the, for example, environmental license proceedings or among other processing during the implementation of the project. So, and also reducing the capacity, for example, some public institutions to reinforce the environmental legislation, or for giving environmental fines or penalties. No, so trying to reactivate our economy, no, very fast, very quickly, no, without any environmental and social consideration, because they consider that it's very important for our societies, not just in Peru. We're talking about in general, and I think that is obviously it's a mistake, because we are going to suffer the effects of these decisions. And the multilateral development banks like IDB, the Inter-American Development Bank, they are right now in a process to change their environmental social framework. But they help right now supporting this process, giving loans for construction, for example, the hospital, or to improve the health system, but there is no environmental social assessment for those investments. No? So I think that we are we are going to suffer on a huge risk of that. It's true that in the case of the energy sector, there are a lot of projects that are stopped because nobody wants to invest on that. So it's in a good moment to think how we want to model the sector, no? Not just in electricity, but also in the oil and gas sector. But I think that the private sector, they are waiting the good moment to restart the operation, especially in some strategic areas like the Amazon zone or the coast of Peru. But it is the same problem in Ecuador, Argentina, and Brazil as well. And the international institution, they are not helping on that because they don't try to improve our planning process, thinking in the next decade. No, they want to have in the business model, the business as usual model. That's it.
Thank you, Cesar. That's quite sobering, unfortunately. So I guess the COVID restrictions being used to further restrict civil society participation, the reduction of institutions to be able to do oversight, and then the removal of safeguards in the interest of quickly rebuilding economies, which I imagine is not unique to Peru. So that, increases the challenges that we are facing in this work. Thank you very much for that overview. We'll then move to, last but not least, our colleague Jerry Arances to give some perspectives from the Philippines. Jerry is the director of the Center for Energy, Ecology and Development and has been at the forefront of climate and ecological justice for 15 years. He has worked with indigenous peoples and rural communities on issues of human rights, natural resources, and minerals management. And in his current work, he focuses on power and energy and its role in pursuing ecological and climate justice. And as the director of SEED, and Jerry is also the convener of the Power for People Coalition. Over to you, Jerry. Thank you.
Thank you, and thanks to all the other speakers that have spoken before me. I have a presentation. Okay, is that visible?
Yes.
All right. All right. So these are the reflections, specifically before COVID and during the COVID time, and as we speak, how CSOs and NGOs and movements in the Philippines are engaging the process in terms of integrated energy planning. So first and foremost, I am from SEED, Center for Energy, Ecology and Development. It's a young institution. We're mainly a research policy institution, but also does a lot of advocacy and community empowerment work and linkages. Let me start with, probably this is very common in Asia because 9 out of 10 coal plants are being built in Asia. And out of that 9 out of 10, 15% of that is in Southeast Asia. So it's the same path. In the last 10 years, we just came up with a review of the last 10 years of our energy landscape in the Philippines, both policy and actual projects that are have been implemented and are in the pipeline. So as you can see in the graph, we've massively upscaled our dependence to coal, specifically and fossil fuel. So it has increased tremendously in the last 8 years and actually in the last 10 years. And a majority of the energy supply, which is around 67% in 58% to 67%, comes from mainly from coal and fossil gas. The gray one is called fossil gas. It just says that natural gas, we now call it in the Philippines as fossil gas. So so that the concept that it's a natural gas can actually be belied already, because indeed it is a fossil gas, just like a fossil fuel, just like coal. So majority of the increase came from those two types of fuels. And most of the electricity that is being produced in the Philippines in 2018 have actually increased already in 2020 with 40%. It's here it's 37%, but now it's 40% of the total power mix comes from coal, basically. And then which if you factor in the last 10 years, it has actually increased 10 times, more than 10 times in terms of the supply of electricity which is provided from coal. There is also a stark rise of fossil gas, as I have mentioned, but there is a proposed pipeline of fossil gas, which is around 8 gigawatts. So it's not just about the dependence on coal and fossil gas in the last 10 years, but more so that we still have around 20 gigawatt of projects that are in the pipeline, mainly on coal and fossil gas. So which brings us to a very troubling situation wherein the energy security of the country, which is basically was addressed 10 years ago, supposedly, that we limit our dependence to imported fuels. That's why the Philippine Congress enacted a law, which is called the Renewable Energy Law, basically to harness the potential and tap the potential of local indigenous sources, renewable energy sources. The total potential for renewable energy in the country is around 10 times the current capacity. So the current capacity of the total power generated in the Philippines is around more or less 22 gigawatt. The whole potential is around 250 gigawatt. That excludes solar power. So you can imagine the potential that was seen 10 years ago, but contrary to the enactment of the law, the Philippines became more dependent to fossil fuel after 10 years. So renewable energy, despite the law being enacted in 2009, so it's now 10 years in implementation, the renewable energy growth in the country has really been lagging behind in comparison to fossil fuel, as you can see in the graphs. Even in the energy supply mix trend by fuel type, with renewable energy, it's more geothermal, biomass, and hydropower that are actually leading the growth in terms of the total power mix in the past 2 decades. So if you compare fossil fuel with renewable energy, it's really the growth of fossil fuel is 3 times that of the capacity of compared to renewable energy in the country, despite the potential that was already seen through a study by the government more than 10 years ago in terms of renewable energy potential in the country. But despite this, there is now a growing proposed pipeline of renewable energy. If you see in the graph, more of solar are actually already in the pipeline, which is being proposed. It's a matter of how these projects will actually be implemented for wind and as well as other sources of renewable energy. But why is it this way? But before I answer that, part of the problem, aside from being too much dependent to fossil fuel, another big problem that we have been facing for quite some time, especially with the reforming the law or the policy governing the power sector, is the exorbitant electricity cost. Manila is actually one of the highest in even the whole country, is one of the highest in the whole of Asia. We're second to Japan in terms of residential electricity rate. So you can imagine how exorbitant the electricity cost in the Philippines is. So there's always a correlation these days between having exorbitant electricity cost and being dependent to fossil fuel, because of course it is imported. So what have been the CSOs and movements have been doing to actually confront this issue? In 2016, after many engagements since 2010 with policymakers, with the Department of Energy, the Energy Regulatory Commission, we finally took a step forward that the CSOs cannot just engage the issue on planning, the issue on particular projects, because the whole format of planning process in the Philippines is too centralized. It is, and at the same time, the electricity or the supply that is determined is basically a proposal coming from the private sector. So if there is no private sector that will be proposing, then the government will actually be handicapped. So that's how they redesigned the whole power sector. It is basically handed over to the market and to the private sector to determine what kind of electricity supply and how many electricity supply would actually be that they would be putting up. So it's a whole privatized system. So it's more of our engagement are only through consultations, which is actually already at a time wherein the design of the whole power mix is already almost fixed by the national office of the national government. So in 2016, we opted to file a case against the Department of Energy for its remiss on the implementation of the Renewable Energy Law. This was a landmark case because it actually produced so much initiatives in terms of renewable energy. As you can see in the mechanisms of the law, it was only 2 mechanisms that was implemented before the filing of the case. But after the filing of the case, it's now 5 mechanisms that are in place. So most of the time, what has been happening because of the implementation of these mechanisms, the growth of the market for renewable energy is actually now starting. But CSOs do not only stop there; they engage the whole the power supply agreements being permitted by the government. So last year, this was also a landmark decision wherein coal PSAs were junked by the Supreme Court. So the reduction, the pressure that was created actually forced the government to come up in the State of the Nation address last year to come up with a position to prioritize renewable energy and to reduce the dependence of traditional energy sources. It was the first time that a sitting president actually acknowledged the advantages in terms of developing renewable energy in the country. There were lots of advances after that, but CSOs doesn't only engage in coal and fossil fuel. There is nuclear. There is other policies that we engage because we need to limit the expansion of coal in the country, as well as the policy itself of the Department of Energy. So it's many-sided approach in terms of the overall planning because the actual planning is very limited. One of the tools that we have implemented this year is actually to call for the financial sector to actually contribute in the development of a renewable energy portfolio in their respective investments and loans. And just recently, before the Earth Day celebration, another big company in the Philippines actually declared its abandonment of coal investments. This is the second company. The first one was in 2015 2014. So this is the second one, which actually is a good indicator that the pressure that the campaigns, the movements, the CSOs, and the NGOs engaging the processes are actually working. During COVID time...
Sorry, I hate to cut you off, but we're close to time. But I just wanted to say there's so much content in that, and it really shows the reason why integrated energy planning is used, right? So we've just heard that a major company agreed to divest from coal. There was an upstream announcement from Duterte himself declaring renewable energy targets. It doesn't get more upstream than that. So, and that sort of demonstrates the purpose of using this process to get ahead of the planning before it's too late at the project stage. If you want to briefly wrap up, Jerry, and also if you have any reflections on whether COVID has changed anything in terms of the advocacy, has it made anything irrelevant? Are there threats or opportunities that you can see?
Yeah. So COVID is actually that's a good segue towards the next slide. And we really wrap our minds into it. And one of the starking development vis-a-vis COVID, of course, all the things that was mentioned, the limitations being imposed, we are also feeling that. The engagement, the capability to engage for communities to actually, the environmental compliance certificates and many other permits, it's limiting us. Even filing cases is very difficult nowadays. But the most startling development vis-a-vis COVID is the massive reduction of electricity consumption, because there are lockdowns that have happened in the Philippines, because the Philippines is like now the epicenter of COVID impacts in Southeast Asia. There were lockdowns. So last March to May, there was a major lockdown, which basically shrink the whole electricity consumption in the Greater Manila area, or even at the national level, to around 30%. So 30% got lost. And because of the whole structure of the power system in the Philippines, which is being privatized, and that most of these contracts actually ensure that the private entities get paid of the electricity, whether they use it or not, whether the utilities use it or not, or disperse it to electric consumers or not, they will have to pay it. So after the lockdown, we experienced the most glaring power price surge in the Philippines in history, like 6 times, 8 times, 10 times, even 10 times your normal electricity bill. It's basically because the reduction of consumption was distributed to all the electric consumers. So automatically, the residential electric consumers have to pay all this exorbitant price surge. And because of this, there is a lot of openings now to actually criticize the whole power system, because the whole power system, one, is inflexible, second, is too centralized, third, there is a big monopoly that actually manipulates everything. And there's a lot of collusion in terms of the market. So the market really doesn't work for the benefit of the people. So a lot of openings here, even to the extent that the Philippine government was forced to actually review the Philippine Energy Plan. So this is another opening for us, that we basically, most of the CSOs under the Power for People submitted, all of the CSOs submitted our take on the Philippine Energy Plan, which basically reflects many of the aspects that we've been pushing for. So there is a platform towards people's recovery for a better powered country. We call it this platform by the Power for People, which basically embodies 4 key elements: relief, refund, renewable energy push, and the overhaul of the current power policy. So we're now engaging all the investigations that have been happening, the Energy Regulatory Commission, even at the local level, to actually push for the agenda. So we're trying to convert the challenges that we are facing vis-a-vis the whole power sector to our advantage. Because most of the coal plants that are in the pipeline, or even the gas power plants that are in the pipeline, because of the shrinking of consumption, there is no need for them to actually be built in the next 2 years because there is no basis. So this is a situation wherein we need to grab the bull by its horn in terms of the policies that we have been advocating and in terms of advancing renewable energy, because any growth will actually need, in this context, renewable source from renewable energy.
All right, thank you, Jerry. Okay, so this has also, in this case, we've had COVID expose flaws of the current system, and that lead to openings, and also the push for renewable powered recovery, post-COVID recovery, which I think is also happening in different countries as well. I would like to quickly check whether there are any questions in the meantime that have come up. If people have questions they'd like to post in the chat. If not, I'm not sure. Okay. Yes, thank you. We do have some questions. There's a question to Ikal. In Kenya, who would you define as the main decision maker for energy accessibility for the poor and vulnerable? The public sector or the private sector? And where do you think the NGOs to work on advocacy? Ikal, would you like to answer that?
Thanks for the question. Yes, I think one of the key things we're seeing is the decisions around who gets access to energy for especially rural populations and the poor is done mainly by the private sector, who then influence the state on how it's done. And because we are a very corrupt country, so based on who gets what, that's what determines the access to the energy. I think one of the key things the NGOs can do is, again, pushing for this planning process. There are a number of suggestions, whether it is going to be, because we have gone into a devolved system of governance, do we try also a devolved system of energy generation that then gives more control to the local and county government systems and around that. So yes, there is opportunity for civil society to engage. It perhaps needs a whole more radicalized, disruptive way of doing it, because the political economy of energy generation is really in the control of money and corruption.
Okay, thank you very much. Then we had a question for Jerry. How are you trying to link the Paris Agreement NDC process towards aligning energy planning for the Philippines to go full renewable energy, if ever it's useful? Jerry.
Yeah, indeed, it's very useful. Thanks for that question, Ping. I never touched on the climate imperatives in my presentation, but in the submission, the recent submission, which was processed among civil society within the Power for People, everyone acknowledged that we need to start with the 1.5 degree and the Paris Agreement in terms of our push with the new Philippine Energy Plan, because the new Philippine Energy Plan is mainly still on coal, some on nuclear and fossil gas. So we need to really push for the Paris alignment, because the Philippines is also a signatory towards that, but also to combine it with the other elements, the economic aspects of renewable energy versus fossil fuel versus coal, because there's a lot already that are in place, but also the other element would be the post-COVID, the green recovery or the green stimulus package that renewable can actually really work for us.
Sorry, I think I was on mute there. Thanks very much for that, Jerry. I think we're coming close to the end time, and I know it's been a long day for lots of you. So I hope this was a useful initial discussion, and I think the panelists would be quite open to continue conversations over email if people would like to follow up. Before we close, I'll give to Ryan for some closing words. Thanks.
Thank you, Jessica. That was just an illuminating 1 hour listening to everyone share their experiences. And all I can say in the end of it is this boils down to people on the ground in probably the worst possible situation that they've ever been in, at least in my lifetime of 40 years. I don't think we have discussed the huge debt piling issue globally, which is on top of the COVID-19 precariousness which people are facing. And the loans that we're looking at from MDBs, the liquidity which is flowing through all these governments, at some point, this liquidity is going to run out and the states will have a bill to pay. And that time is coming very, very soon. So what Jerry is saying with rising electricity prices and the way the game is already set in the power sector just shows you that if we do not decouple people's needs away from these systems, when that bill comes to pay, we're going to be worse off than where we are right now. So I'm sorry I have to leave it on a somber note, which makes our work more people focused. And I think we have to transition very quickly in order to consolidate our voices on the ground. And I guess that's why we're doing this South-South work. And hopefully you guys will all be with us as we move forward.
All right, thank you, Ryan. Some good motivating closing words. So thank you very much to all the panelists, all the participants. I'm sorry if we didn't get to all the questions, but please feel free to be in touch with the panelists. And thanks again to NGO Forum, Ryan, and also Jen Derillo, who has been in the background organizing the logistics. I think this will be also available as it has been recorded. Good night and good day to you all. Thank you.
Jessica. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.